Hey guys, welcome back to the Pageant project. I hope your week is going well. Quick word, most of you by now know that we're doing weekly mock interviews held Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. At least I believe that's the time, yes. Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, which by the way, if you're in Australia, like myself, that's, for me at least here in Sydney, that's Friday at midday. But this week is the first time we've actually had to put in a second session because the first session booked out within about 48 hours. Now, that happened last week, but I didn't know that was just going to be a one-off or not. And moving forwards, it looks pretty likely that we're going to need at least 2 sessions to try to fit everyone in. And I bring that to your attention. And by the way, the second session will be run pretty much directly after the first, just to make things a bit easier scheduling wise for me and for you. So the first one is at 8 p.m. Eastern. The second one's going to be at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, which I appreciate is a bit late for some of you. So if you're thinking about booking in, I encourage you, if you're one of the younger ones, to book in at 8. If you're a night owl, like many of you are, then go for the 9:30 one. We're going to try and fit everyone in because, and this is the thing the reason I brought it up, it seems like it's working. And when I say that, we've had more than a few of the women who've been turning up on a regular basis, right? I don't like claiming credit when someone has just turned up once and then saying, oh, everything that title holder has achieved is because I'm so brilliant, which I would never say anyway. But we've had more than, I was just trying to think about this before. I think we've had at least 3 or 4 of our regulars go on to win their titles. Now, they are local titles or state titles, but they're still titles. And the big thing is they've all come back and said they did really well in interview, and they've all pretty much said, that what we covered during those weekly mocks has been very, very helpful. And of course, the weekly mocks are run by me, which means you get my version of things, you get my knowledge. But also, I think a lot of it is down to the structure of what we do. And I had one of the people message me just when she was looking to book in this week, and she said one of the big things that was helping was the fact that I get you guys to act as the impromptu judges. So we have 6 women, which by the way is the maximum. We have 6 delegates, 6 contestants. One of them is in the hot seat, so to speak, very often, and the other 5 of you ask questions. Why? Partly it's to keep you engaged, but partly, and this is the main part, you get to see what it's like to be sitting on the judging panel, decide what question you want to ask, and you get an appreciation when you're listening to your fellow contestants answer. You get an appreciation for what works, what doesn't work. And sure, you might be different to the person on the judging panel next to you, but it still makes you think, because now you can look back at your own answers and go, oh, okay, she said that, and I like the way she said that, so I'm going to incorporate that into the way I do it. I'm not saying copy, by the way. I'm saying, incorporate. That's different, right? Not verbatim, just plagiarize. Or you might look at the way someone does something and go, oh, I don't like that, and I do that too, so I'm going to cut that out of my performance, my answers. But I think it's hugely useful if you can have that judging experience to help you with your own interview performance. And look, not all of us have the opportunity to be sitting on a judging panel every week. And some of you may never have had judging experience. I have judged for Miss Earth, which is one of the 4 biggest pageants internationally anyway, and that was quite an experience. But suffice to say, being on the other side of the equation can really help you when you're answering your own questions. And so I think, yeah, sure, I might take some of the credit for helping with the interview and helping a few of the women win their local titles. But I think a lot of it comes down to the way I structured it, which I guess you could say is me as well. But I was quite intentional that I wanted a group setting, that I wanted you guys to be interacting and not just only interacting with me and only listening to me. I wanted you to work with your peers, to work with some fellow contestants. I'm sure there are people of different ages and different skill levels, but I like that. And a lot of that comes from my experience with coaching, with sports coaching, or even going to things like yoga classes. You go into group settings and you learn from one another. You can practice with one another. You're not just in a class where you're waiting for the instructor before you can do anything. So if that interests you, if you're new around here, and if you haven't enrolled and you've been around here for a while, I strongly encourage you. Pageantmock.com, Thursdays, as I said, 8 p.m. normally. Maybe we're putting that 9:30 p.m. Time slot in there regularly. But if you're someone who just really needs a chance to practice interview, because that's what we all need, is yes, you need the guidance that maybe a private coaching session can give you, but then you need a chance to apply it. And that's what this session is for. So it's not to replace private coaching sessions or private interview coaching. It's to give you a chance to practice under semi-realistic conditions, or as close to realistic conditions as we can make possible. And they are only $19.99 per session. If you're one of our paid VIPs, which only cost $19.99 per month, then you get to attend those weekly mocks at no extra charge. I will say I am seriously considering upping the price because that is greatly undercharging. Let's just put it that way. I'm aware of what some other coaches are charging for mock interviews, and $19.99 per session is stupidly underpriced. Having said that, that kind of was the aim. I wanted to give you guys a chance to practice, as I said, semi-realistic or realistic conditions, but at a pricing point that's not going to break the bank, especially when you've been spending, you know how much you guys spend. You don't need me to tell you. But I may very well be putting up that price just because I think it's just far too cheap. And sometimes, not to put too delicate a point on it, and I know this, when you try and give away free stuff, people don't value it. And sometimes people just think it's better or assume it's better when you charge more. Like, I mean, if you look at a Mercedes or a Tesla versus a Hyundai or whatever it is, I mean, they're all cars. I mean, can you really say that one that costs $10 million is that much better than one that costs $10,000 when all you need to do is get from point A to point B and you're not a racing driver? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a discussion for another day. But get involved. Because, and here's what I wanted to talk about today. We are going to talk about interview. But as I work more and more and on a consistent basis with a larger and larger variety of contestants, there are more and more patterns that I'm noticing in between you. And why this is important is because if there is a pattern, if there's a problem that a lot of you are struggling with, then I know that's something that I should speak about and probably make content about, such as these weekly videos. And one of the things I've noticed is, let me put this idea to you, or float an idea, hypothetical, right? You guys know, at least I think in America, I think you guys call it like 101, 201, 301. And I think that's what you call classes in college, what we would call university. So 101 is the first year, it's the entry level. So let's say it's math 101 or algebra 101, and then you hopefully pass that. And next year you come back and it's algebra 201, and then maybe the third year, if you have to do it for a third year, it's algebra 301. And I actually had this in university as well. I remember we had computer science 101, and then in second semester was 102, and then in the second year it was 201, and then 202, and then 301, 302, etc., etc. And I want you to think of your interview skills in this way, as in interview 101, and then interview 201, and then maybe interview 301. Now, the number of levels we can quibble back and forth. So I got something stuck in my throat. We can argue back and forth as to how many levels and, what you want to make each level represent. But if we start with 101, 201, 301, let me give you this idea. 101 is basically, can you put a coherent sentence together? Now, some people can't do that. And if you can't, that's all right. Maybe it's a case of you get so nervous whenever you're on interview that normally you're fine, but in interview settings, you just completely fall apart and maybe you can't get a word out at all, or your sentences just, not that they ramble, but they start and then they just stop awkwardly because you forgot what you were saying. Basically, basic competency, basic skill, where you get into that room and you go, well, at least I spoke in coherent sentences and made some sort of sense, and then walked out and I wasn't hugely embarrassed. That's 101. Almost everyone gets past that level with a bit of practice. You find the way, right? 201 is where you start learning more of the advanced technique. So you've passed 101, which means that you can probably you can talk in coherent sentences and you're not hugely embarrassing yourself, that you can answer questions. 201 is where you start learning techniques such as key talking points, right? Points that you need to get across or that you want to get across no matter what questions you get asked. I would say also 201 is things like key stories or using stories or working on making your answers more concise and trying to fit them within, let's say, a 30-second framework. So these are more advanced skills, but they're not basic level skills. They're not simply, can I speak in a whole sentence without making a fool of myself? They're the next level to make your answers that bit sharper, that bit punchier, right? So sharper, punchier, more concise, and a bit more compelling. The issue that I found, the pattern that I've begun noticing, is that that's where 99% of you, if you get that far, so if you get past the basic competency of 101, you get to 201 and you start practicing those skills that I mentioned. Maybe you're doing scripts as well, or you're memorizing little sound bites. But you stop there. You get there and you stop there. And what do I mean by stop? I mean, you keep practicing, but you keep practicing 201 skills. You keep practicing talking points. You keep practicing scripts. Not that I recommend memorizing scripts by any stretch of the imagination. And you could also apply this to onstage Q&A. You could even apply this to your the onstage components with your walk and things like that. But you get to this level where you are, memorizing things, or you're working just on skills. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's 201. But the mistake is not to do 201. The mistake is to stay stuck in 201 and think that's all there is. And so many of you get stuck there. And the biggest sign that you are stuck at that level is that you can actually answer questions really well and you're still not winning. I mean, I know it's interview, so maybe you can't tell that you win interview. But you know what I mean? You feel like you've stagnated. Your interview now isn't much better than it was 6 months ago or 12 months ago, despite spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on coaching that maybe doesn't go anywhere, or you've been spending at least like dozens of hours, maybe hundreds of hours working on your skills, and you're a bit better, but you're not really that much better. Like you still don't know what to work on next. And that's where I want you to think of this analogy in terms of, okay, we started with 101, fine. 201, where we keep learning the skills and you keep practicing, by the way. You can always improve, obviously. But what's after 201? Well, 301, obviously. But what do I think is in 301? 301 is where you go beyond answering questions and you move into the realm of being a great communicator, being a great public speaker, having true magnetic charisma, being someone who can influence people, being someone when you deliver a speech or you deliver an answer, people don't just nod off or just pretend they're paying attention. You actually can capture and hook people's attention and keep it. Because basically you have something to say, but the wrapper that you're putting it in is also super attractive. I don't mean, by the way, how you look. I mean, the way you're talking to people is compelling. You are now not a talker, you are communicating. And by the way, communication, it is a two-way street. And this is why I call it 301, because you can't really tackle these ideas of communication, persuasion, of reading your judging panel. You can't get to that unless you know 101, which is speaking without making a fool of yourself, and 201, things like talking points, things like knowing your key stories, or knowing how to keep an answer concise and knowing when you're talking too much and not rambling. But once you have those skills and you've practiced them and you're comfortable with them, the next level is not to keep working on 201 and then wondering why you've plateaued and you're not improving. The next level actually is completely different. And I would say overall in your progression, I would say once you get to 201 and you've done pretty well, I think you're only maybe 40, maybe 50% of your true potential. The other half, I would actually estimate it could be a lot more than that. But let's say 101 is like the first 10%, or 15 or 20%, because you've got to be able to speak in a whole sentence. 201, I think, gets you about halfway. Now we're about 50% of your true potential. The remaining 50% is nothing to do with the same skill sets. It's to do with the skill set that's actually going to be the most important to you after pageants, which is communication, persuasion, influence, knowing how to build rapport. And I covered this in our mock session last week. You'll be talking with your judges, you'll be communicating with them, and you'll see one of them perk up when you mention a certain topic. So last week with Eden, she perked up when someone mentioned Dolly Parton. I know Haley mentioned that one of her judges, Elle Smith, a former Miss USA, she saw Elle perk up when she used the word cognizant. Now, what relevance does this have? Well, cognizant is a fairly long word. It's a word that really only brain boxes are going to use, which Haley certainly is. But if you see someone perk up at the word cognizant, you probably know similarly to yourself, they're fairly high functioning, fairly intelligent, probably fairly well educated. And so you can begin to lean into that a little bit more. Now, learning how to read the room or read your judges, you may also notice when you're losing rapport with someone, when they begin fidgeting in their seat, or they're not looking at you, or they're looking at their phone, or they're, yawning and they're trying to cover it up. Now, that's not to say every time they yawn, you're losing them. But overall, if you are engaging, if you are persuading, if you are charismatic, if you are selling yourself as the only logical choice as an ex-title holder, the judges should not be yawning. I mean, we don't yawn when we're doing something really exciting. We yawn when we're what? When do you yawn? When you're bored, okay? But this is the thing. You could get past interview 101 and be really good at interview 201 and still be really boring, right? And I'm not making this as a personal judgment about you or anyone else, but you got to realize being able to speak in whole sentences doesn't automatically mean you do well in an interview. Using your talking points, using your stories, keeping your answers under 30 seconds, that doesn't mean you're any good at interview. You're better than you were at 101 or before you began this journey at all. But as I said, I think you're only half of the way there, and the missing piece is huge. It's a difference between being one of those politicians who just speaks on TV all the time and you're like, okay, whatever, he's just a talking head or she's a talking head. It's a difference between that and when you listen to the great communicators or the great speakers or the people who are really charismatic on TV. That's that missing piece. And that's not a tiny missing piece. It's the whole enchilada. Because if you're going to go into that interview room with the cojones to actually believe they should crown you as an ex-title holder, you need more than just talking points, guys. You need to do more than keep your answers under 30 seconds. And the reason that I realize this is a pattern, well, one of the reasons why I realize it's a pattern, and just as a reminder, that means that it applies to more than one person. It's a recurring theme amongst a lot of you. But when I ask people how they did an interview, or even if I just replay their answers straight away and ask them, what did you think of your answer? So many times the answer is, well, to be specific, the feedback that you give yourselves very often, it's 101 feedback or it's 201 feedback. You mentioned, I could have used my talking points more, or I could have used a story here, or I rambled a bit, which means, you didn't keep it under 30 seconds. Guys, those are 201 level skills. I mean, if you get lost in an answer and you just wander off aimlessly, then that's a 101 skill. But it's very rare when I'm asking you to give yourself feedback, or for someone to give themselves feedback. It's very rare that they go, well, my body language was a bit closed there. My eyes wandered up, which indicated that I was internal rather than communicating externally. I also noticed that I didn't engage, I didn't press when I saw that my judge leant in when I was talking about my advocacy. And I could have stopped there and just said, do you understand what I'm talking about? Or do you want more clarification? And this is where you stop being just another talking head and you become not a performer, but it's like the difference between an actor who's just memorized their lines and someone who moves you emotionally. And if I haven't persuaded you often enough in the previous few weeks, we humans make all our decisions emotionally first. Even the ones of us who like to think of themselves as being fairly stoic. If you doubt this, then give me a better explanation as to why Taylor Swift is so hugely popular. I got nothing against Taylor Swift, but how many times more popular is she than the person next door singing karaoke? Like billions of times more? And is she really a billion times better? I mean, I don't know who's singing next door to you. Maybe she is, maybe Taylor Swift is a billion times better. But I doubt it. And I mean, you and I both know a lot of people who can sing, who can play the guitar, play the piano, even do some songwriting and write a chord and maybe actually write a perfectly good song. But Taylor Swift is Taylor Swift and you're in your room strumming along and no one's listening, right? Now, it's not to say Taylor Swift doesn't have a skill. I think the skill is marketing. But again, marketing is emotional. Taylor Swift, by any objective logic, cannot be a billion times better than everyone. I know I'm using like billion because I'm just thinking numbers, and you could say, well, that's not the objective indicator of blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I get that, okay? It's the moral of the story, not the specifics that you should be paying attention to. So after all this, let's say that interview 301 is where you go from just talking to persuading. It's where you go from just talking and answering to influencing, to actually getting in the room and having this confidence that no matter what you think of me before I walk in the room, by the time I walk out, you're going to know that I'm the best one. And if I haven't done that, it's because I haven't done my job. And by the way, if you don't ask me questions that allow me to do that, I'm going to take control of this thing and I'm going to ram it home and I'm going to do it in such a tactful and skillful way that you won't even know. And the final words I'll give you on this is, it's similar to when I have conversations with many pageant contestants, whether it's, with one of my friends or coaching sessions, and they will often say, wow, you're a really good listener. I really enjoyed our conversation. And maybe it's during an interview. And I don't tell them, but I don't think that they realize that they think it was a good conversation, but they did 80% of the talking, maybe 90% of the talking. That's the skill. It's to leave people with a positive impression of yourself such that they're going to pick you because they have to. Because like that person, or she is, not he is in my case, but that contestant, that title holder, she's passionate, she's skillful, she's intelligent, she's disciplined, she's got a plan, and she's relatable, and she's so friendly. It's not easy to logically get across all those things in a 2-minute interview. And that's where that interview 301 comes in, where you know how to influence people. And as I said, if I haven't stated this enough already in this week's video, I think that's at least half of the game, but the skill sets to practice are completely different. And so what I want you to make sure, if you feel like you've stagnated an interview or you're getting a bit frustrated, my guess is that it's going to be because you're stuck at level 201 and that you probably didn't even know there was a 301. And you know what? Maybe there's a 401. Maybe there's a postgrad in this or PhD. But you get my point. You might be practicing the wrong things for your skill level. And rather than practicing the same thing over and over again, maybe you would be best served to start practicing some higher level skills. And by the way, what I will say, if you want the secret to knowing what skills to practice, don't look within pageantry. Look without. Look at the people who are not great pageant people necessarily, but they're great communicators, they're great influencers, they're great speakers. Look at a TED Talk, look at a politician, and start looking and analyzing what makes them so good at communicating. And the reason I say don't necessarily confine yourself to pageants, because so many of you are overcoached to the point where you all sound the same. And so if you're going to learn from anyone, learn from the best. Don't just learn from the person who's closest to you or the best person in this room right now. We've got the internet, right? You can look for the best influencers, the best speakers in the world. And I would say, learn from them, model them. Okay? So go away and have some thought about this. If you're just at the beginning of your pageant journey, then I understand this might be a bit above, it might be not so relevant to you. But I think people actually get to level 201 very quickly, because a lot of you can already speak in coherent sentences. And even if you can't, 1 or 2 weeks worth of practice will probably get you there. 201, okay, a couple of months of intense practice, I think you'll have, I mean, there's something to be said about always practicing your fundamentals. But I think after a couple of months of intensive practice, the amount of improvement you'd notice there is minimal. Don't get stuck there, guys. Don't think you've mastered the art of interview because you know how to refer to your talking points, or that you know how to keep your answers under 30 seconds. Remember what I said? If I ask you, what did you think of your answer? If your answer is in terms of level 201, then I know you haven't done level 301. Because if you had, you'd be thinking on a different level. So have a think. Have a think about what skills you really want to learn. Not just talking points, not just 30-second answers, not just stories. How are you going to be able to convince the judges that you're the best person in the room? Answer that, reverse engineer it, that'll tell you what you need to be working on.